welcome to another edition of Radical Grace Radio.
I'm Pastor Gary Held.
And my name's Matthew Pancake. This is episode 833. And with a little bit of practice, we've kind of gotten good at talking about things from a gospel perspective. We don't always, here's something that we don't always do. We don't always get on here and talk directly about Jesus. I mean, that's something that should be happening in preaching. It's like Jesus preached, crucified, raised from the dead. That's something you would understand. But then there's a way in which all of that gospel stuff shows you a different way to look at the life. Look at our lives.
You start looking at everything else through that lens.
Yeah, because it's, hey, you know what? If it's a thing that really does change the world, it really does change people's perspectives, then what is that perspective, right? What does it look like? What happens when somebody really takes that seriously? That's what I hope that people see us doing on this program every week. Back to you, Pastor.
Me, well, I'm in I have a bit of an advantage because I have this, of course, and then of course Sunday is an opportunity to preach, and the sermon can bring people into an engagement with Christ that is different than what we do here, because preaching is really a different animal. It's it's like teaching, and I know that there are in some churches they have the teaching pastors. These would be different kinds of church denominations, and I do also understand that there is a sermon style where you basically just keep a kind of a ongoing commentary and exhortation based on whatever book you're in. Expository preaching.
Right.
But that's really not what Lutherans are doing when we're trying to bring Christ and Him crucified into the lives and the ears of our people. And then on top of all that, then I also have right now a new member class that is going on during the weeknight, and that's been fun. I mean, actually, it's been going differently than I've done other adult instruction classes, because I've really leaned hard on them to, no, you need to get your questions, as many as you can think of right now, answered here. It's not because you won't have an opportunity going forward to get your questions answered, but this is the best opportunity you're going to have. Without making a special appointment or something like that.
You have the ear of the pastor right now.
Yeah, because, and besides that, you're asking a question that is relevant to someone who is new to thinking this way, and everybody else around the table is in the same boat. That's why this person's struggle with an idea is relevant to this other person who, would never have put it that way. But, it turns out that, I kind of wonder about that as well. So you get to say something in addressing one person's concern that brings I don't want to give the idea even for a second that it's bringing the theology down to the lay level, because it's not about, it's really like taking folks that are, well, in some cases, they've been a long time in not so great churches, and it's not bringing theology down to them. It's lifting them up to say, oh, wow, this is, the view from up here is terrific.
Right.
I can see gospel for miles and miles and miles.
Right. That's right. That's exactly what we're talking about. So in our news stories today, I'm still trying to get off this Christian news roll thing, because it's like, although today you could call this the pastor's edition. The first story was the sermon was couched as a Bible study. I actually did look at the video. Let's go ahead and do that thing that we sometimes call the news roll. So Pastor Greg Laurie, who couched his sermon he started it this way. He said, so who's ready for a Bible study? And everyone was like, yeah, man. It was like, okay. So in his recent sermon series, The End of the World, he focused on the rapture as the upcoming prophetic event. In other words, he believes that it's coming really soon. At the Harvest Christian Fellowship, Pastor Laurie stressed the significance of the rapture and the urgency for individuals to reconcile with their faith and seek forgiveness from God, as it could happen at any moment. In anticipation of the event, the pastor urged his congregation and the global audience, it's assumed everyone's paying attention, to get right with God. Citing 1 Thessalonians 4, he explained that believers would receive new resurrection bodies during the rapture, reunite with loved ones who have passed away, and be caught up to meet Christ. This event, he emphasized, marks the initial phase of Christ's long-awaited return. Which is exactly what it's the initial phase. Drawing from Luke 12:35 and 36, he urged his listeners to remain vigilant and prepared, likening their readiness to a servant waiting for his master's return. He also addressed some people's reluctance towards studying end times events, arguing that understanding these teachings dispels ignorance and brings renewed purpose and hope. Ultimately, he emphasized the potential for a joyful reunion with departed loved ones during the rapture. Dispels ignorance. Back to you, Pastor.
That is so interesting that he's aiming to do that, because some people would actually say he's trading on ignorance, but I don't want to go. We can editorialize and comment later. So the number 4 story is that in a highly anticipated verdict, Brian Houston, that guy is the co-founder and former head pastor of the renowned Hillsong megachurch / media empire. They're kind of both. And he was declared not guilty by an Australian court on charges of concealing his father's sexual abuse and failing then to report it to the police. Now, the ruling comes after Sydney Court Magistrate, I'll try to get this name right, Gareth Christophe, anyway, stated during the trial that Houston had a reasonable excuse for not reporting his father's crimes. The case revolved around allegations that Houston's father, and that would be Frank Houston, a former preacher and a person that was affiliated with the ministry, that he sexually assaulted a young male in the 1970s, and that Brian Houston had known about his father's abuse since 1999, but he had chose not to discuss it or to disclose it to anyone. Well, anyway, the prosecutors argued Brian Houston's actions were driven by a desire to safeguard the church's reputation and his father's legacy. The defense countered that Houston refrained from reporting the crimes because the victim in this case, Brent Sangstock, expressed his reluctance to involve the police in the matter. So this case then garnered significant attention due to the influence that Hillsong Church has, certainly around the globe. It's a global phenomena, known for massive congregation meetings, but also for producing widely recognized worship songs. So the Hillsong, name is a kind of a brand name. Anyway, the verdict arrives in the wake of a series of scandals that have rocked Hillsong, including the dismissal of a lead pastor, Carl Lentz, due to an extramarital affair, and the then allegations of sexual misconduct against several other pastors, and the megachurch, which had humble beginnings as a suburban congregation, has become the focus now of a financial fraud investigation. And despite the legal proceedings and all the things that are going on, Brian Houston's influence on the church's global presence remains undeniable. I mean, he's the man. He's the guy in front for sure.
Yeah, they may need to bring him back like Apple brought Steve Jobs back at some point.
Maybe.
Okay, the number 3 story. Guess what? The LCMS made ink.
I usually kind of brace myself because it's like most of the time we're not making great ink. But tell me, what happened?
Okay, well, this is going to sound like it doesn't apply, but Former President Donald Trump and 18 others have been indicted in Georgia for their alleged involvement in attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. The list of those indicted includes lawyers, individuals with close ties to Trump, and also a prominent faith leader, Reverend Stephen Lee, an Illinois LCMS pastor. And he's among those accused of conspiring to conduct a criminal enterprise, attempting to tamper with witnesses, and soliciting false statements. So what happened? Okay, brace yourselves. Reverend Lee's indictment centers around his alleged interaction with Georgia election worker Ruby Freeman. In December of 2020, former President Trump had accused Freeman of engaging in election fraud along with her daughter. Lee's reported involvement includes visiting Freeman's home, knocking on her door, and parking his vehicle in her driveway. Freeman was concerned and immediately contacted the police. The police provided Reuters with body cam footage that depicts an officer approaching Lee's car. This is what happened. During this interaction, Lee disclosed that he is a faith leader. And he also acknowledged that he knocked on Freeman's door and emphasized his law enforcement background, explicitly noting that his past position as a sergeant in California, and that he was, Reuters reported that Lee had previously served as a police officer in California and had provided chaplaincy services to police officers, including those in New York City. However, and this is a bit of a correction, I guess, an NYPD spokesman clarified that to Religion News Service that Lee had never worked as an NYPD chaplain. Now, later in the body cam footage, Lee encouraged the officer to let him speak to the election worker, suggesting he and his cohorts have some, quote, pro bono service for her. Freeman declined his offer. This interaction is alleged to be part of a larger alleged scheme to sway Freeman's testimony regarding the 2020 presidential election. The pastor is believed to have collaborated with other prominent Trump supporters who have also been indicted. A representative for Living Word Lutheran Church, that's where he was, said that Lee was working at the church as an interim pastor, but is no longer the pastor. Mike Baer, who's head of communications for LCMS in Missouri, confirmed Lee's status as an emeritus pastor, but declined to comment on the indictment due to ongoing investigations. Actually, I'm not so sure how much he would know, because I would assume that he would have told the reporters, you'd be better off calling the district president or whoever it is that has his position in that district, because it's not as though they know what's going on in Georgia, right? So actually, we kind of know who they should contact. I mean, this is the Florida Georgia district down here, so that's my assumption.
Yep. So the number 2 story is that Robert Dell, again, a former pastor from Florida. So you're right. We got a theme going on, don't we? They're, all pastors all the time, basically.
Almost.
A former pastor from Florida was arrested for allegedly masterminding a massive theft operation from the Home Depot stores involving stolen merchandise that was worth $1.4 million. The charges against Dell include racketeering, conspiracy, and dealing in stolen property. And, indicating that the scope of his involvement in this multi-million-dollar theft ring that was uncovered by a joint investigation by Florida Organized Retail Crime Exchange Task Force and the state law enforcement agencies. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation involving Dell and four of his accomplices. So Dell, who was associated at one point with the Rock Church and also a halfway house that aids drug addiction recovery people, reportedly exploited his pastoral and founder status to manipulate others into participating in his criminal scheme.
I didn't make it clear what was happening there. People that are in the halfway house are the people that he manipulated into joining in the criminal. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. No, I think it's a good clarification. So the stolen goods Um, Predominantly, these are going to be name brand products. Were stolen from Home Depot, all in locations across various counties, including Citrus, Hillsborough, Manatee, Pasco, Pinellas, Polk, and Sarasota counties. These are counties in Florida, and Dell's accomplices, in this case Daniel Mace and Jessica Wild, played a pivotal role in the theft, victimizing stores repeatedly and delivering the stolen items to Dell's residence. And these goods were then sold on eBay under, this was his eBay handle, Anointed Liquidator. I got to give him props for that. Anointed Liquidator. Okay. And the investigation suggests that the operation might have spanned over a decade, resulting in an estimated loss of something like $5 million. So, Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody, who made a statement on the case, expressed her commitment to combating organized retail theft in the state. And then she expressed her commitment that these charges also were going to extend to Dell's wife, that's Jacqueline, and his mother, Karen, both of them accused of aiding in the operation, while the Florida Office of Statewide Prosecution handles the legal proceedings against the defendants. Now, the church, meanwhile, the Rock Church, clarified that Dell is no longer associated with their faith community. Yeah, well, I'm sure that's true.
Right. Okay, so the number one story, we ran out of pastors, but there's a reason why we ran out of them. So, a series of devastating wildfires on the island of Maui, Hawaii, has claimed the lives of at least 106 people, making this the deadliest wildfires to hit the U.S. state in over a century. Meteorologists say that the fires were triggered by a fast-moving dry winds that were generated by Hurricane Dora, and one fire spread at an astonishing rate of 1 mile per minute. Whew. Wow! I just realized that you know how sometimes things sink in, like you know it, but you don't know it, and then suddenly you realize what you just said. The causes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the causes of the fires remains under investigation while authorities grapple with the disaster's emotional toll and logistic challenges. The historic town of Lahaina was particularly hard hit, with hundreds of individuals still missing and the death toll anticipated to rise further. Governor Josh Green described the situation as emotionally catastrophic. He called for patience as search and rescue workers navigated the overwhelming destruction in the affected areas. The blaze that swept into centuries-old Lahaina destroyed nearly every building in the port town of 13,000. That fire has been 85% contained, according to the county, and another blaze, known as the Up County Fire, has been 65% contained. More than 3,000 people have already registered for federal assistance through FEMA. And that is the end of the news roll. See, we ran out of them because it just got to a point where you have to talk about this thing because for one thing, I don't want to be someone to not mention it, but the other thing is like as the details come out, like there's another detail that hit me right there is like that this was caused by a hurricane. And it was the dry winds on the other side of the hurricane, because that's the way it works. There's a wet side, there's a dry side, and that's what caused this. And it moved it at a mile a minute. That's fast.
Well, that's 60 miles an hour.
Right. That's what.
And you think, well, okay, I mean, people ought to be, at least it should be possible to flee because your car will typically do. But that's like if you had a straight road to like
somewhere to go.
Yeah, and somewhere to go. Here's the fire coming, and I'm going to just take off, and I can drive faster than 60 miles an hour. So, I'll stay ahead of it. Yeah, probably not, because you're going to be weaving around. I don't think that, from what I remember, I've only been to Hawaii one time, and that was a long, long, long time ago. But I don't think they have a whole lot of long lengths of straight road because it's so mountainous. Everything has to, cut back and go around and different
Right.
contour. It follows the contour of the land in so many ways.
Right.
So you might have some stretches of straight road, but yeah, then you got the other idea. Where are you going to go? So yeah, that would be terrifying
Yeah.
to say,
Um,
okay, we are right now, we know the fire's coming. We have maybe be generous. We have a whole hour's head start. Where in
where
the
are we
world
going?
do we
Yeah.
go?
From something like that, because you're talking about a catastrophe that, I've been around for 57 years.
Yeah.
I don't recall ever hearing about a wildfire like that in Hawaii. Now, I know that they've happened because, like, you can imagine that something like that would happen anywhere. I mean, it could,
Yeah.
right? Any place where there's something that could catch fire, I'm sure you could have that. But like this,
Yeah.
and the part that disturbs me, and this connects to the Greg Laurie thing, there's people of several kind of overlapping stripes, you know, end times people, um, conspiracy theory people, um, evangelicals, I'm afraid, end time nuts, who are saying that Maui is being punished by God. Now, why? I'm not sure. I guess because it's low hanging fruit. It's just easy. It's like because there are lots of places and let's just stick with the United States. Lots of
Mhm.
places in the United States that, if God were going to punish and understand me for a second. I'm not saying that you should or that you do or anything like that, God. But, it just always astounds me that this is the thing that happens. That people have, this is what they have to say about a thing. I mean, it's like, and then like the secular people, like Jeff Bezos, for instance, where people like kind of express their hatred for him, pledged $100 million to this in aid out of his own pocket. It's like,
Mhm.
so what? I mean, I don't know. It's almost like people's priorities are backwards.
Well, when you said that, I didn't think about the fact that the wind speed was so high that the fires would be just racing along. I mean,
Right.
that's what you're really describing.
I mean, if you've ever seen, I mean, you have, because you and I both have experienced hurricanes. And most of the time, we're not experiencing the heavy winds. Um, but those are big enough to be blowing things along. Let's just pick it up and here we go. And if it's carrying, and if it's dry, like we've seen dry winds, but if this is mostly dry winds, which means that nothing is getting wet, which would have been helpful,
Right.
but nothing is getting wet and it's picking up stuff that is on fire and spreading the fire itself because, you can do that. It just takes off. It's
Well,
just mind boggling.
and you made the point before we started recording that let's suppose, for reasons that there's no obvious explanation, your home was not touched.
Right.
But everywhere around you is
It's
like
gone.
burnt to the ground.
Yeah.
So it's not like you can just say, oh, I think I'm going to try to continue on and keep my life sort of on the same track that it was before. There's no going back.
To where do
There's
you,
just no going back.
well, yeah, first of all, probably all of your electric and your water and everything else is ruined. So that's not a thing that's going to happen. But probably the grocery stores are gone. The gas stations are gone. Um,
Where were you employed?
that's probably gone.
Probably gone.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, it is a house. I mean, it is
I
someplace that you could stay, but
I would go
um,
and try and get assistance from the government office. Oh, it's gone too.
yeah,
I mean,
you have to go to a different island to get. Yeah,
it's just okay. So it's just too
yeah,
much. Too much. And speaking of too much, we had too many pastors
yeah.
making the news roll. I mean, this is I don't know what to say about some of these
Well, as much as I
different
would like
instances.
to talk about our making ink, with the LCMS, I would rather talk about Pastor Greg Laurie because anytime it seems like anytime a pastor wants to make a name for themselves, they either do one of two things: they go political or they do
Oh,
this,
well,
or
yeah,
maybe
that could,
both. I mean,
yeah.
because that would be how are we going to like increase engagement on our website, Pastor Greg Laurie, oh, we'll do some end time stuff. Now that sounds cynical, but century after century, or at least for the last 150, 170 years, this has been a thing that the church has been like latched onto, like a pit bull, this end time stuff. And it. Look, I don't want to be sound cynical about the end times, but I've been told so many times that it's about to happen that
Hmm.
I am cynical about when people tell me it's about to happen. That is a thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Well, he's urging his listeners to get right with God, right? Because it's the
right.
time is short, so get right with the God. And well, hell, hold on there, buddy. Isn't getting right with God, isn't it a good enough reason that
By
he's given
itself.
you he's given you an opportunity, he's given you his son, he's given you all kinds of reasons why there's nothing that should be standing in the way of you having a relationship with God. And but no, he's got to say, well, and now you really should, because you know the time, it's going to come down, because of course the idea is that as soon as Jesus gets back, doesn't matter at that point.
Yeah.
You're
It's over.
if you weren't already on the right team, you're
Yeah,
toast. That's what he's trying to
I
do,
know.
is
I know.
use that as a little bit of way to whip up some anxiety. So
And that's the thing about, dispels ignorance, right? Okay. So, but the thing about it is like if you're confusing the gospel before you even start on your end times preaching,
yeah,
we're done. I mean, get right with God. Well, how about like if you want to proclaim the gospel, you have to start talking about how God got right with you. God was in
good
Christ
point.
reconciling himself to the world. That's the exact opposite of telling people you'd better reconcile yourself with God. Now, it's not that there wouldn't be a desire in me and you and anybody else to reconcile with God, but
Right.
the gospel is about what God has done in Christ for me.
And
And he doesn't even start there.
no, because he does have his this is where your cynicism is going to plug in again. There's
I'm
there's a
cynical about my
certain way
cynicism
that
anymore.
well there's a certain way that going at it this way, instead of like, here, let me put it this way. Nobody ever got rich proclaiming the pure gospel
Yeah.
that I know of.
Well, Paul was still making tents as far as I know.
Okay. So, I mean, if your intention, I'm not saying this is he may really believe exactly everything that's coming out of his mouth. But if your intention is to let's have the greatest sermon series we've ever had in this church, and let's get people really ramped up for, the future events that are coming real soon now. So, he believes it. And plus, it gives, well, it shows that his church is, I guess, relevant in their views. That would make them relevant. That would make the relevant. Oh,
Mhm.
you guys, you know, you're doing liturgical worship and you're just following the readings appointed. Well, why is that relevant when we can talk? We have a sermon series on how everything is going to just, like, be in a twinkling of an eye. It's all going to be gone. And so now, then you can get the people to be more, I guess you get them to be more interested in
Getting
what's
right with God. That's
what
the
kind of
reason we preach it
condition,
that way.
my spiritual life is in. I guess, I mean, well, I
Yeah.
think that that's not the best way. You know what? I don't see that that's exactly what Paul is doing. Paul is certainly rejoicing. He's looking forward to the glorious appearing of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. That's how he likes to refer to it. This glorious appearing that's going to happen. Um, I can't tell that he's ever trying to use that to coerce or frighten anybody. I mean, he wants them to be like, basically, usually he uses that or at least that line of thinking about Jesus' return, to give people who are Christians but they are suffering persecution. He wants them to have some hope to hang on to. Let's be nice to have a shred of comfort, right?
Right.
And this should give a believer some comfort.
Yeah, he
So
wasn't sitting around saying, "Gee, I wonder how we increase engagement here in this new first century church. How do we do that?" Well, we make them anxious about whether they're right with God or not. And it's like, well, that's the proclamation of the gospel, God getting right with you. And because you could try to get right with this is how all the pagans think. You could try to get right with God and do things that try to please him and manipulate the gods. But in spite of all of that, and besides all of that, and over against all of that, Paul comes along and he preaches about a God who is busy doing that on our behalf.
Christ
instead.
and him crucified. Yeah.
Okay. Now, speaking of which, what are we going to do on the other side of the break?
Well, this is an interesting opportunity. I'm going on a short weekend away because attending to a family matter, and it's a happy one. It's not like something upsetting. It's a good thing, but I'll be gone, and I've got somebody covering my pulpit this Sunday at Trinity, and I don't know what his message is going to be, or even for sure which of the readings he's going to preach on. But I know what I would preach on if I were in my own pulpit on this Sunday. And so I thought we'd look a little bit at a reading from Matthew's Gospel, chapter 15, I believe. And it's the story of the Canaanite woman, and she wants a healing for her daughter. And then it's not just the healing itself, it takes place, but it's the conversation, it's the kind of raw emotion before that gets interesting.
Yeah. So you want to do that because that's what you would have preached on, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in that case, stick with us and we'll be back with more Radical Grace Radio in just a moment.